Pain isn't weakness, it isn't failure, and it's never something to be ashamed of. Pain is a voice, quiet sometimes, deafening at others, but always trying to tell us something we need to hear. For some, it enters with thunder, sudden and sharp. For others, it builds like a slow ache in the bones, staying so long it becomes part of the landscape. However it arrives, pain demands presence. And more importantly, it deserves gentleness. This isn't a book for people who have never struggled. It's for the ones who have cried in places no one could see, who've learned to carry invisible weights while smiling politely, who've answered, "I'm fine," while barely keeping their voice from cracking. It's for those who have survived things they still don't have words for, and for those who are still surviving, one breath at a time. We live in a world that rushes toward comfort and achievement, quick fixes and polished surfaces. But underneath all that urgency, there's a quieter truth. Growth doesn't begin in the light. It starts in the dark, where we're unsure, hurting, uncertain. Pain is the seedbed of transformation. It's not the end of us. It's the start of something new. You might feel broken right now, or maybe just worn down. But pain doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're alive, and it means your heart is still trying. A wound, if it's given air and care, doesn't have to bleed forever. It can breathe. It can teach. It can heal. We're taught to fear pain, to see it as a problem to be solved or a flaw to be fixed. But what if pain is a teacher instead of a threat? What if the sharpness of it isn't punishment, but invitation? What if your pain is asking to be listened to, not silenced? You don't need to be unscathed to be strong. The deepest strength is often quiet and cracked open. It's the kind that shows up again after everything has fallen apart. It's not flashy. It doesn't post about itself. It simply keeps going. Maybe you're carrying a pain that doesn't have a neat resolution. The kind that doesn't get tied up in a bow at the end of a chapter. That's okay. This book isn't about pretending that everything happens for a reason. It's about finding meaning, even when there's no easy reason in sight. It's about turning toward your pain instead of away from it, because only in turning toward it can you begin to transform it. You're not expected to get over what you've been through. That phrase is too blunt, too dismissive. The truth is, we don't get over deep pain. We learn to carry it differently. We reshape around it. Sometimes we grow stronger where the cracks once were. Like a wound that heals into scar tissue, pain can leave behind something tougher, more resilient, more real. And still, pain can be softening. It can open you up to things you never noticed before. The warmth of someone sitting quietly beside you, the small kindness of a friend checking in, the miracle of one more day, even when it feels like too much. When we stop fighting the pain, when we give it room to breathe, it doesn't shrink us, it expands us. This is your reminder. Your pain matters, not because it needs to be justified or measured against someone else's. It matters simply because it's yours. It shaped you. It lives in your story. And your story is worthy of being honored. There's no timeline to healing, no scoreboard, no race. Healing isn't linear. It can feel like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, then a few more sideways. That doesn't mean you're failing. That means you're human. Sometimes all you can do is breathe through the moment. That counts. That's progress. Let this book be a place where you can put your armor down. Let it speak to the part of you that's tired of pretending. Let it remind you that pain doesn't make you weak. It makes you deep. That your suffering, as much as it hurt, is part of what makes your compassion run wide. That your sadness, as heavy as it feels, has given you eyes to see things others miss. We're not here to bypass the hard stuff. We're here to move through it, slowly, gently, honestly, together. Not to rush healing, but to honor it. To recognize the quiet strength that blooms in the dark, before any light arrives. You are allowed to grieve. You are allowed to ache. And you are still growing, even here. A wound that breathes is a wound that's healing. You may not be blooming yet, but you're rooting deeper than you know. Every tear, every shake of your hands, every breath you've taken when you wanted to give up, it all matters. It all counts. The seed doesn't sprout on the surface. It breaks open in the dark. So if you're hurting right now, know this. You are not alone. You're not weak. And you're not behind. You're exactly where you need to be for something new to begin. Not because the pain is fair or deserved, but because even in the harshest places, something in you is still reaching for life. This is not the end of you. It's the beginning of another chapter, the one where you stop hiding from your pain and start walking beside it, not in defeat, but in quiet defiance. With tenderness, with courage, with grace. You don't have to pretend you're okay, but you can remind yourself that even in your most painful moments, you're still becoming, still forming, still here. And that, in itself, is strength. It announces itself. It steals the air from your lungs and reorders your sense of safety. It's loud not because it wants attention, but because it needs it. And for a while, that pain becomes the lens you see through. You make choices around it. You shrink in places it might be triggered again. You carry its echo long after the event has passed. But here's the truth no one tells you in those early chapters. Pain may speak first, but healing always gets the last word. The first time you were hurt is not the moment your life was decided. It may have shaped you. It may have influenced the way you hold people. Trust slowly, guard your softness. But it does not own you. You are not the wound. You are the one who lived through it. There is a difference. Revisiting the origin of your pain doesn't mean staying stuck in it. It means giving it a name, a shape, and a boundary. Not so it grows louder, but so you can finally stop letting it speak over you. Because somewhere along the way, pain starts to pretend it's the truth. It says, you'll never be safe again. It says, this is who you are now. And if you hear that voice long enough, it becomes easy to believe it. But the purpose of looking back isn't to relive the injury. It's to reclaim the parts of you that pain tried to convince you were gone forever. Sometimes the healing begins by asking a quiet question. What would my life look like if that first pain didn't get to define me anymore? Not erase it, not pretend it never happened. Just release it from the job of deciding your worth. You are allowed to hold your past and still reach for your future. You are allowed to say, that shaped me, but it does not contain me. The human spirit was built to mend, to grow around broken places, to keep blooming, even with scars. Maybe you don't remember the exact moment you changed. Maybe your first pain was slow and creeping, subtle in the way it taught you to dim yourself. Maybe it was sharp and obvious, a before and after moment. Either way, it matters. It deserves compassion, not dismissal. But the narrative that grew from that moment doesn't have to run your life. Pain has memory, yes, but you also have agency. You can choose which parts of your story you water and which ones you let go dry. Here's something tender and true. Healing doesn't erase the past, but it can change your relationship with it. You can visit the place you got hurt and not collapse. You can touch the bruise and not flinch. You can say, yes, that happened, but I kept going. And that quiet defiance, that is your power. You've already survived more than you give yourself credit for. The proof is in your breath, in your ability to still feel, in your desire to keep growing. You wouldn't be here reading this if your pain had truly won. There's strength in revisiting the pain without letting it own you, in saying, I remember what happened, but I am not frozen there. It takes courage to go back and gather the parts of yourself that pain scattered. But you can, slowly, carefully, with kindness. That first hurt didn't see who you'd become. It didn't anticipate your resilience. It couldn't know how you'd learn to rise. It tried to write the first chapter, but it doesn't get to write the last one. This is your reminder. The things that broke you didn't end you. They started a longer conversation, one that includes healing, growth, and yes, even joy. Because you are not the moment you were cracked. You are everything you built from that point on. You are the tenderness that grew from betrayal. You are the boundaries born from being unheard. You are the softness that survived hardness, the empathy that bloomed from your own ache. Sometimes we look at our pain and think, this is the worst thing that ever happened to me. And maybe it was, but it can also be the place where something else began. Strength, depth, clarity, a deeper relationship with yourself, a greater understanding of others, a more rooted sense of compassion. You're not asked to be grateful for what hurt you. That's not the point. But you can honor the growth that came from it. You can say, I never wanted this pain, but I will decide what it means in my life now. Let that be the shift. The first hurt is loud, but you are louder. Maybe not in volume, but in will, in grace, in persistence. You didn't have to keep going, but you did. And that matters more than anything pain ever said about you. So go ahead. Revisit the wound, not to reopen it, but to understand it, to see it clearly, maybe for the first time, with eyes that no longer belong to the person who was broken there. You're not that person anymore. And that voice that once said you'd never heal, let it fade. Because now you know the truth. Healing speaks in quieter tones, but it speaks with more authority. It says, you made it through. It says, you are still here. And most of all, it whispers, we begin again, now, on your terms. That first hurt spoke, but it didn't finish the story. You will. Something that gets solved by turning away. It waits. It simmers beneath the surface of every hurried moment, every avoided silence. It speaks more loudly, the more we try to silence it. There's a strange kind of peace that begins only when we stop trying to outrun what hurts. When we finally sit down beside our pain instead of pretending it isn't there, something changes. The discomfort doesn't vanish, but it shifts. The fire you feared might consume you becomes a little smaller when you face it head on. Like a wild flame that calms not when you smother it, but when you learn to breathe next to it. Sitting with pain doesn't mean wallowing in it. It means acknowledging its presence without judgment. It means saying, I see you, to the parts of yourself you've kept hidden, not because they're shameful, but because they're raw and real, and asking to be met with kindness. Discomfort, when pushed away, only expands. It stretches into the corners of your life. It starts showing up in your choices, your patterns, your relationships. The pain you exile becomes the architect of your reactions. But when you give it a seat, even for a moment, it softens. It may not leave entirely, but it no longer has to scream to be heard. There is a stillness in staying, a quiet power in not turning away. It doesn't feel powerful at first. It feels like trembling, like crying in the shower, like sitting in a parked car because you're not ready to walk inside. But that is the work. That is the strength, not in fixing it, but in facing it. Most of us were taught, either directly or indirectly, that pain should be hidden, that strong people move on quickly, that emotions are too much, that crying is weakness. So we learn to tuck pain away in neat, invisible boxes, smile through it, work through it, pretend we're fine even when we're breaking, but pretending only delays the healing. Eventually, the only way through is through. There's a kind of courage in choosing not to numb, in choosing to feel the full weight of what you've carried, in letting the tears fall without trying to stop them. Not every pain needs to be dissected, but it does need to be witnessed. And sometimes, the only witness you need is yourself. There will be times when you sit in silence and feel everything at once. Sadness, rage, confusion, longing. There will be days when you want to crawl out of your own story and find a different one. And that's okay. Wanting to escape doesn't make you weak. It just means you're human. But if you can sit with it, just long enough to say, "This is hard, and I'm still here," you begin to reclaim something powerful. You begin to break the loop that says you must run to survive. You teach your body that it can feel and still be safe. You remind your heart that it can ache and still be whole. Pain doesn't grow because it's felt. It grows because it's feared, because it's ignored, because it's shoved into corners until it has no choice but to leak out in other ways. But when you allow it into the light, it loses some of its grip. You begin to see it not as a monster, but as a messenger. And sometimes that message is simply, be with yourself. In those quiet moments of staying, something sacred happens. You start to recognize the resilience in your own breath. You notice the strength it takes to not escape. You hear the softer voice beneath the hurt, the one that says, "I'm still here. I haven't left you." That voice is the beginning of healing. There is no need to rush the process. Pain has its own rhythm. It unfolds in layers. It returns in waves. But each time you stay present with it, even for a breath, you weaken its hold. You teach yourself that feeling deeply is not a liability. It's a pathway to truth. You don't have to solve the pain all at once. You don't have to understand every corner of it. You just have to be willing to stay long enough to hear what it's been trying to say. And sometimes, all it wants to say is, "I need care." When you stop running from the heat of your own fire, you begin to notice its light. You see that it isn't here to destroy you. It's here to transform you. Not with force, but with presence. Not by burning you down, but by helping you see what you've been carrying and how much of it you're ready to release. This work is not glamorous. It happens in quiet hours, in tear-stained pillows, in journal pages and lonely walks. It happens when you choose to feel instead of flee. It happens when you decide that pain deserves presence, not punishment. And with each moment of presence, you build trust with yourself. The kind of trust that says, "Even when it hurts, I will not abandon me." That trust becomes your strength. Eventually, the pain settles. Not because it's gone, but because it's been seen. It no longer needs to shout. It no longer has to shape your every move. It becomes part of your story, not the villain, but the teacher. And you become the person who stayed, who stopped running, who felt the fire and chose to sit with it until it softened. That's how healing begins, not in escape, but in presence, not in numbness, but in the quiet bravery of saying, "I'm here, I'm listening," even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Because pain, when met with presence, becomes less of a burden and more of a bridge back to yourself. Belongs nowhere. When you try to explain it and the words fall short. When people say things meant to comfort that only deepen the sense of not being understood. There's a kind of invisibility to emotional wounds. When there's no cast or crutch, people assume you're fine. When there's no breakdown, no tears, no outward sign, they move on. But not all pain cries loudly. Some pain waits in silence. Some sits like a weight on your chest, only noticeable to you. And the work of carrying it quietly can be exhausting. You learn how to function with it. You learn how to fold it into your routine, to keep it just beneath the surface. But that doesn't mean it's not there. And it doesn't mean it's small. Pain that hides often grows roots in the dark. It's easy to start doubting yourself in that space, to wonder if maybe you're just being too sensitive, too much, too emotional. You try to shrink the ache to match what the world will accept. You start editing yourself, silencing your needs, minimizing your wounds. But pain doesn't heal when it's invalidated. It deepens. The truth is, not all scars show, but all deserve tenderness. Just because the world can't see what you carry doesn't mean it isn't real. And just because your pain is quiet doesn't mean it lacks depth. The world may not always give you the validation you long for, but that doesn't make your experience less true. There's a deeper kind of acknowledgement, the one you offer yourself. And that is where the healing begins. To witness your own ache is to choose compassion over dismissal. It's to say, I believe you, even when no one else says it. It's to stop demanding evidence for what you feel and begin honoring what you know. Your inner world deserves care, not courtroom logic. This is not about convincing others. It's about refusing to abandon yourself. Sometimes we expect our pain to be seen and softened by others. We look for someone to name it, to hold it, to validate it. And while there's nothing wrong with wanting to be understood, it becomes harmful when we begin to believe that pain must be visible to be real, or that it must be shared to be worthy of tending. There is strength in being witnessed, but there is also deep, quiet power in witnessing yourself. That's what you do in the dark moments. When the room is still and you feel the ache return. When you put your hand on your own chest and simply say, I know this hurts. You stop arguing with the pain. You stop needing to explain it. You just let it be there, with you. That is the tenderness pain has always needed. Not fixing, not logic, just presence. There is something sacred about tending to wounds that no one else sees. It's not weakness, it's devotion. It's how you learn to become your own sanctuary. You start to build a relationship with your pain that isn't rooted in fear or shame. You stop seeing it as something broken and begin seeing it as something deeply human. You make space for it, not to live there forever, but to breathe, to soften, to heal. And eventually, you begin to find moments of peace, not because the world finally understands, but because you've stopped needing it to. There's a certain kind of clarity that comes when you stop seeking external confirmation and start listening to your own knowing. You realize that your pain doesn't need an audience. It needs a witness. And sometimes, the most powerful witness is the one inside you. This doesn't mean you never share. It doesn't mean you isolate or keep it all inside. It just means you stop tying your pain's worth to someone else's ability to understand it. You give yourself permission to feel without apology. And in doing that, you begin to offer the same grace to others. You begin to recognize the invisible battles they might be fighting. You speak more gently. You assume less. You listen deeper, because you know what it's like to carry pain in silence. And that knowing becomes your empathy. The world will not always see what you carry, but you can choose to see it. You can choose to honor your own heart, even when it feels unseen. You can whisper the words to yourself that you once longed to hear. I believe you. I'm here. You're not making it up. You're not being dramatic. You're doing the best you can, and that's enough. And over time, the ache begins to shift. It doesn't disappear overnight, but it doesn't feel so heavy, because it's no longer exiled. It's no longer fighting to be noticed. It's simply being held, with gentleness, with dignity, with love. You are not broken because the world didn't see. You are not lesser because you carried it quietly. You are resilient. You are deep. You are here. And every time you honor what's inside, even when it's invisible, even when no one else understands, you take one more step toward wholeness. This is how you heal in the unseen spaces. This is how you rise with tenderness. Not because someone else gave you permission, but because you finally gave it to yourself. Something broken open, so something else can take root. The most fertile things often begin in decay. Compost is a mess at first. It smells like rot and endings, but inside it, transformation is happening, quietly, invisibly. Layers of what once was are breaking down to become the soil for what could be. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is too ruined to be of use. Even the most unrecognizable remnants feed something new. Suffering can be like that too. Hardship strips us down. It unearths what's buried. It brings us to the edge of ourselves where only the truest things remain. In the moment, it doesn't feel noble. It doesn't feel transformative. It just feels like falling apart. But deep underneath, something is loosening that was too rigid to shift on its own. Something essential is beginning to breathe. We live in a culture that rushes to label pain as wrong, that urges us to avoid it, deny it, distract ourselves from it. But when we numb pain, we also numb the wisdom it carries. Pain, when we let it speak, shows us what matters. It shows us where we're still tender, where we've been holding too tightly, where we need to tend with more care. The truth is, not all growth feels good while it's happening. In fact, the most meaningful change often feels like unraveling, because that's exactly what it is. A coming undone of old beliefs, old stories, old protections. It's messy, and yet so much beauty is born from that mess. So many beginnings look like endings at first. To reframe suffering is not to romanticize it. It's not to pretend it's easy or fair. It's not to minimize the sharp edges. It's to honor the reality that hardship shapes us, and sometimes the shaping is sacred. It's to let suffering be a teacher, not a tyrant, a guide, not a judgment. We don't have to like pain to learn from it. We don't have to want it to respect its role in our becoming. There is wisdom in giving ourselves permission to feel the ache while still asking, what is this growing in me? Not in a rushed or performative way, but in a slow, grounded way, with patience, with gentleness, with time. Growth born from suffering is often the quietest kind. It happens in moments of surrender, in the breath you take after the sobs, in the choice to keep showing up even when it hurts, in the silence between what broke and what's beginning to rebuild. Sometimes, the only evidence of progress is that you're still here, that you haven't given up on yourself, that even in the ache, you're still willing to soften instead of harden. That's strength, not loud or flashy, but enduring. To suffer and still choose softness is a kind of rebellion. To suffer and still stay open to life is a kind of wisdom. You begin to see pain not as an enemy, but as a signal, a call inward, a clearing out. And from that clearing, new life starts to emerge. Not because the pain is gone, but because you are rooted deeper. There will be days when this doesn't feel true. Days when all you feel is the mess. That's okay. You're not meant to bypass the experience. You're meant to be in it, fully. You're meant to give yourself permission to grieve, to ache, to fall apart. But know this, the soil is still working. The breakdown is still becoming nourishment. What looks like ruin might be restoration in disguise. We often think of healing as returning to who we were before the pain. But the deeper truth is that healing creates someone new, someone more honest, more whole, more anchored in truth. Not in spite of the suffering, but shaped by it. Not erased by it, but refined. There is a strength that only comes from walking through the fire and still choosing to love. There is a courage in sitting in the ashes and trusting that something can still bloom. This is not blind optimism. It's a kind of faith built from the ground up. It says, even here, life is not done with me. Even now, something good can grow. You are not what happened to you, but you are shaped by it. And you get to decide how. You get to gather the pieces and ask, what is still true? What do I want to carry forward? What can be let go? What from this pain can feed something kinder? That's the alchemy, turning what hurt into what helps. turning loss into compassion, turning sorrow into depth, not all at once, not in perfect order, but slowly, over time, like compost, messy, unglamorous, essential. So when the ache returns, and you feel like nothing good can come from it, remember, the work is happening even when you can't see it. The soil is changing, the roots are reaching. The future is being fed by what feels unbearable now. Let yourself be shaped, not shattered. Let the pain make space for something stronger, softer, more alive. Let your suffering become the ground where resilience grows. You don't have to pretend the pain is beautiful, but you can trust that it isn't meaningless. You can hold space for the hurt and still believe in the harvest. Because growth, real growth, often smells like compost first. And still, from that brokenness, life finds a way. Builds in the spaces where truth was swallowed, where boundaries were blurred, where our softness wasn't safe. Bitterness, in its rawest form, is grief that wasn't witnessed. But even bitterness holds something honest inside it. A signal, a clue, a plea for better care. There is nothing weak about being wounded, and there is nothing shameful about feeling bitter when the wound isn't met with justice or repair. But if we stay there, if we keep sipping from the cup of resentment, we start to poison the part of ourselves still capable of connection, trust, and hope. Bitterness was never meant to be a home. It was only ever meant to be a doorway. The invitation is not to deny the pain. The invitation is to meet it with clarity, to learn from what broke us, not just what comforted us. Because inside every betrayal is a truth about what we need. Inside every moment of being overlooked is a reminder that we matter. And inside every ache of mistreatment is a seed of self-respect waiting to be planted. Pain, when it's listened to with care, becomes a blueprint for boundaries. Not walls that shut the world out, but lines that say, this is where I end and you begin. Boundaries that do not come from paranoia or punishment, but from reverence. A knowing that your peace is sacred, that your heart is worth protecting, that your time and energy are not up for grabs. You can let the wound make you wise without letting it make you hard. That is the quiet miracle of healing. Bitterness begins to dissolve, not because you forgot the harm, but because you finally honored the lesson. And once the lesson is integrated, the resentment has nowhere left to cling. Boundaries are not weapons, they're invitations. They say, if you want to stay in my life, here's what respect looks like. They're not ultimatums, they're clarity. They're not threats, they're self-trust in action. You no longer tolerate what you used to endure, not because you're angry, but because you've grown. Because the old pattern has outlived its place in your story. You are not here to carry the weight of others' confusion or disregard. You are not here to shrink around people who make you question your worth. You are allowed to outgrow dynamics that once felt familiar. You are allowed to change the terms. You are allowed to say no, not anymore, and this is what I need now. The people who love you well will meet you there. The people who can't may fall away. And that, too, is part of healing. Not everyone is meant to walk with you through every chapter. Some people teach you what love is not, so you can make space for what love can become. You don't have to fight to be respected when you've already decided to respect yourself. That's the shift. That's the quiet return to center. You stop begging for what you've learned to give yourself. And from that rooted place, you speak, act, and choose differently. Boundaries are not just external lines. They're internal alignments. They are the practices that keep you steady in a world that will often try to pull you off course. They are how you stay connected to your truth in moments of pressure, conflict, or fear. And they are built not from theory, but from lived experience, from the hard-earned wisdom of pain. When you begin to transform bitterness into boundaries, you reclaim your energy. You stop rehearsing old conversations in your mind. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop pouring into spaces that have no capacity to hold you. Instead, you pour inward. You get honest about what hurts and why. You name what you're no longer available for. You create space, real, sacred space, for what supports your well-being. This is not easy. It takes time. There are days when the bitterness creeps back in, when old stories pull at your sleeve, when the ache of what happened feels louder than the peace of what's possible. That's okay. It doesn't mean you failed. It means you're human. It means you're still healing. You can acknowledge those moments without collapsing into them. You can feel the weight without putting it back on. Sometimes transformation isn't loud or visible. Sometimes it's the quiet act of not reacting the way you once did. It's the small pause where you check in with yourself before agreeing. It's the way you step away instead of chasing validation. It's the voice inside you that whispers, "You don't have to prove your worth here. This is the path, not linear, not perfect, but true." You rise from what hurt, not by erasing the past, but by refusing to be ruled by it. You become someone who can love without self-abandoning, who can forgive without forgetting the lesson, who can hold space for others without giving up your own. From the ashes of betrayal, clarity rises. Clarity about what matters. Clarity about what you deserve. Clarity about the kind of life you want to build. It's not bitterness that carries you forward. It's boundaries. Loving, living, breathing boundaries that say, "I have learned, I have changed, and I will not lose myself again." Let the bitterness soften. Let the lessons stay. Let your new boundaries speak not from pain, but from power. Quiet power. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The kind that lives in your posture, your presence, your peace. The kind that holds you steady, even when the past tries to pull you back. You are not who hurt you. You are who you became after. And that, all by itself, is enough. It happens when you wake up again after a night that nearly undid you. It happens when you make breakfast with a heavy heart. When you return a kind word after being ignored. When you keep showing up, especially when it feels like no one sees it. You've been gathering strength like roots growing beneath the frost. Invisible to the world, maybe even invisible to yourself. But there, alive, taking hold, deepening, becoming something that can hold weight. There were days when your resilience looked like silence, when you didn't have words for what you were feeling, but you still carried yourself through. When you didn't break down, not because you weren't broken, but because breaking wasn't an option. And that too is strength. Not the kind that demands applause, but the kind that quietly rewrites your nervous system. That says, even here, I will not give up on myself. Sometimes it's hard to see how far you've come because survival doesn't leave a map. There are no signs that say, here's where you chose to stay instead of run. Here's where you grew when it would have been easier to numb. Here's where you rebuilt yourself in silence. But that strength is real. It lives in your body. It lives in your breath. It lives in the choices you've made since everything fell apart. You don't need to prove your resilience to anyone. The proof is in your presence. The fact that you are still here, reading this, breathing, listening to the deeper pull of your own healing, that is not small. That is not accidental. That is a life speaking for itself. There's a softness in you that never gave up, even when it cracked. A tenderness that kept reaching for light, even when buried under grief. And if you look back, not just at the pain, but at the path, you'll see the footprints of your strength, not as a scream, but as a series of steady steps. You've lived through things your younger self couldn't imagine surviving, and you did it not by knowing how, but by doing the next right thing, one breath at a time. That's what strength really is. Not certainty, not control, but faith in motion. The kind of faith that keeps walking without a guarantee. So many times, You felt like you were falling apart. But maybe you were falling into place. Maybe the dismantling wasn't destruction. It was truth, revealing what had always been inside you. Grit, tenderness, courage that didn't need to be loud to be real. We are told to chase strength as if it's something outside of us. But more often than not, it's something we uncover by returning to ourselves. It's in the moments we finally say, "This hurt me," and let it matter. It's in the moments we choose not to become what wounded us. It's in the days we find the tiniest reason to try again. Look at your life, not through the lens of everything that went wrong, but through the lens of what you've held together. The people you've cared for while in pain, the work you've done while healing, the forgiveness you've given that wasn't asked for, the dreams you kept alive when hope ran thin. That's strength. That's the real kind. And it often lives beneath the surface. It doesn't always feel brave. Sometimes it feels like exhaustion. Sometimes it feels like taking the smallest step and calling it enough. But that's how strength grows. Incrementally, intimately, inwardly. Maybe you forgot how strong you are because it never felt like strength. It felt like surviving. It felt like enduring. It felt like staying gentle in a world that made you want to harden. But gentleness is not weakness. It's restraint. It's depth. It's choosing love when bitterness would be easier. You've done that, again and again. And maybe you haven't received the recognition for it. Maybe no one saw the nights you sat with your own pain, so you wouldn't pass it on to someone else. But it happened, and it matters. You don't need a loud voice to have a strong one. You don't need to be fearless to be brave. And you don't need to constantly push to prove that you're capable. You are already evidence of the power that lives in steady, unseen growth. Like roots beneath winter soil, you've been preparing, deepening, finding stability in the silence. And even when it looked like nothing was changing, something was. You were. Strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just the quiet way you rise, the way you keep choosing peace, the way you extend compassion to others without draining your own cup, the way you finally learn to say no, to say yes, to say nothing when silence is the boundary. This chapter of your life isn't about becoming stronger. It's about realizing you already are, that you've been strong in ways no one taught you how to be, that you've survived what should have shattered you. And now, you're not just surviving, you're growing, becoming, healing in layers. You are not behind. You are not lost. You are in the middle of your own blooming, quiet, steady, true. And when spring comes, and it will, you'll see just how deeply you've rooted. You'll see that the strength you thought you were still searching for was always growing beneath the frost. It never left you. You just needed time to feel it again. That echo, there is still a kind of presence, a quiet tether that reminds you once cared that much. You still do. To grieve is not to fail. It is to honor. Grief says, "This was real. This was part of me. This mattered." It isn't weakness to mourn. It is one of the strongest things you can do, to let pain touch you fully, without running, without numbing, without pretending you're above it. And here's the quiet truth. Grief does not come to end you. It comes to change you. It softens sharp edges. It slows frantic motion. It asks questions you never knew you'd have to answer. Who am I now? What does life mean in the absence of what I've lost? What does it look like to live with this ache? You don't need to answer right away. You only need to feel, to let the sorrow move through you without shame, to let the tears fall without apology. This too is part of being human, fully, deeply, vividly human. We're often taught to move on too quickly, to fix our faces, return to routines, tuck our sorrow into silence. But what if grief isn't a problem to solve, but a companion to walk with? What if it's here not to trap you in the past, but to slowly open your eyes to what still remains. Grief has a way of clearing out the noise. It shows you what matters. It shows you who matters. It sharpens your sense of the sacred, not in some distant abstract way, but in the immediacy of a shared glance, a memory, a laugh that catches in your throat because you didn't expect it. And then one day, something unexpected happens. A bird sings louder than it should. The sunlight lands just right on your hand. Someone tells a story and you laugh, not the forced kind, but the surprised kind, the kind that feels like a small release. That moment, however fleeting, is your soul saying, I still know joy, even here. Grief carves space. That's what it does. It hollows you out, yes, but not to leave you empty, to make room for light, for meaning, for softness, for a new kind of beauty, one that comes not in spite of sorrow, but through it. There is life after loss, not the same life, not the one you imagined or planned for, but life still, with its cracked edges and unexpected blooms. Life that asks you to carry what you've lost and keep going, not pretending it didn't hurt, not minimizing the weight of it, but holding it like something sacred, because it is. Grief will reintroduce you to life in strange ways. You'll start to see things more vividly, feel more deeply, love more deliberately. You'll notice how someone reaches for your hand. You'll find yourself cherishing silence, not as absence, but as presence. You'll understand that joy is not the opposite of grief. It is made more vibrant by it. To allow yourself to grieve fully is to allow yourself to live fully, because only someone who loves deeply can feel the depth of this sorrow. And only someone who honors that sorrow can open themselves to joy again without guilt. You might worry that moving forward dishonors what you've lost, but staying frozen does not preserve love. It freezes you away from the very life that love once nurtured. Grief isn't asking you to let go. It's asking you to carry differently, to walk forward with a fuller heart, not a smaller one. Let the ache soften you. Let it remind you that feeling deeply is not a flaw. It's your gift. You are someone who remembers, someone who loves in echoes and traces, someone who lets sorrow stretch their spirit wider, not smaller. You may never get over what you've lost. That's not the point. But you will learn to live with it, to integrate it, to speak its name in your soul and know it still has a place, not as pain alone, but as a thread in the fabric of who you are becoming. There will be seasons when the grief feels louder again. Birthdays, anniversaries, random Tuesdays. Let it rise. Let it move through you like a tide, knowing it will recede again. These moments don't mean you're back at the beginning. They mean you're still human, still loving, still remembering. You are not broken. You are reshaping. Your grief is not a sign that you are lost. It is a sign that you are still connected, still tethered to what matters most. You are learning how to breathe through the ache, and that is a sacred kind of strength. If you're still grieving, it doesn't mean you failed. It means you're still opening, still feeling, still becoming. Grief isn't a detour away from life. It's the deeper entrance into it. Through the sorrow, you find truth. Through the ache, you find meaning. Through the cracks, the light returns. And one day, you'll notice something has shifted. The weight is still there, but it carries differently. The tears still come, but they cleanse now. The love remains, not in the way you first knew it, but in the way it keeps showing up in your choices, in your kindness, in your willingness to stay open. Grief doesn't end you. It deepens you. It reintroduces you to life, not the life you expected, but the one that is still waiting. And within it, there is room for joy, real joy, the kind you fought for, the kind that rises from a heart that has known the dark and still dares to seek the light. This is not the closing of your story. This is the chapter where sorrow teaches you how wide the human heart can stretch. This is the part where you begin again, not as someone untouched by pain, but as someone shaped by it, softened by it, strengthened by it. You are not here to forget. You are here to remember differently. You are here to live with love that includes your loss, not in spite of it. And every time you let the grief speak, every time you let it move through you, you make more room for life. Grief carves space for new light, and it's already beginning to shine through you, tell you who you are. And slowly, your posture shifted, from clenched fists to open hands, from holding your breath to letting it go, from surviving your pain to sitting beside it with a steady heart. You are learning that strength isn't about pushing pain away. It's about letting it speak without letting it rule. Somewhere in your journey, pain lost its grip. Not because it grew smaller, but because you grew deeper. You stopped shrinking around what hurt and started expanding around it. You started seeing pain not as something foreign to exile, but as something human to understand. It was never about erasing what happened. It was about reclaiming your relationship to it. And now, when the memories return, when the echoes rise up from old places, you meet them differently. Not with panic, not with shame, but with a quiet, grounded knowing. I have walked through this before. I can sit with it now. You no longer need your pain to prove anything. Not your toughness, not your worth, not your identity. You are becoming someone who carries the past without being dragged by it. Someone who doesn't flinch when the wound is mentioned, because the wound has become a place of wisdom, not a source of fear. This is the shift. When you become a person who moves with gentleness through their own history, you begin to honor all the versions of yourself who got you here, not just the strong ones, not just the ones who kept going, but the broken ones too, the tired ones, the ones who cried quietly and kept showing up. You begin to speak to your past self not with blame, but with tenderness. You understand why you coped the way you did. You understand why you closed off, why you froze, why you ran, why you clung. You hold those moments with grace. You don't try to justify them anymore. You just offer compassion, because that's what pain always needed. Not judgment, not resistance, but presence. And now you are present to it. You have become a soft landing place for your own ache. And that is no small thing. This is how healing speaks. Not in grand declarations or final victories, but in small, sacred recognitions. I no longer hurt the same way. I no longer fear what once undid me. I can be with myself in my fullest range and still choose gentleness. You start to become a refuge, not just for others, but for yourself. And in doing so, you no longer seek from others what you've learned to give within. Validation, understanding, safety. You've become your own anchor, your own soft place, your own calm, and it radiates, quietly, unintentionally. The way you speak, the way you listen, the way you allow space for other people's sorrow without needing to fix it. You become a mirror of what you've offered yourself. And in that, you start to create safer spaces wherever you are. Your pain, once something you wanted to hide, becomes a sacred part of your becoming. Not as a badge, not as a story to be constantly retold, but as a quiet knowing woven into the way you live. There's no need to broadcast it. You simply embody it. Wisdom shaped through weathering. You begin to meet life differently. You no longer expect it to be painless. You don't resist the ache when it shows up. You greet it with the understanding of someone who knows. I've been through enough to know I can hold this too. There's humility in that, and grace. You don't demand certainty. You don't pretend control. You simply live with presence, with awareness, with a heart that is cracked open enough to let light in, and still chooses to remain open. Pain no longer defines you. It informs you. And through it, you've become someone who knows how to sit in the dark without losing sight of the dawn. Someone who holds space for grief and still believes in joy. someone who sees the mess and still chooses love. This is not the erasure of pain, it's the integration of it, and it's sacred work. When you say, "I carry pain, but it no longer carries me," it is not a boast, it's a prayer, a thank you to every version of you who made it possible. It is an honoring of the journey, the scraped knees, the silent nights, the days when getting out of bed was the bravest thing you did. It's an honoring of the fact that you stayed, that you didn't abandon yourself in your worst hour, that even if you wavered, even if you stumbled, even if you turned away for a time, you found your way back. And now you hold yourself gently, steadily, without the sharp edges that used to cut both ways. This is not perfection, it's presence. Not immunity from pain, but a deeper intimacy with it. You've learned to sit with the full spectrum of being human and not run. That is a kind of wholeness no comfort ever taught you. Only the ache could. You've become someone who listens, who notices, who pauses. Not because life is slow or easy, but because you are no longer speeding through it to escape. You are here for it now, really here. The joy, the sorrow, the tension in between, all of it. This is the sacred middle place. You still carry pain, but gently now. You still remember the past, but it's not your prison. You still feel deeply, but you are no longer undone by every wave. You have found your footing in the storm. You've become someone who lets their story breathe, who speaks to pain like an old friend, not a feared shadow, who no longer needs to conquer it, only to meet it with care. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are in the process of becoming someone beautiful and whole and real. Someone who holds pain and lets it rest instead of wrestle. And in doing so, you become a quiet kind of light. One that doesn't blind, but guides. Not by force, but by presence. Not by pretending the dark never came, but by showing how you lived through it and stayed soft anyway. Even when nothing made sense, you chose to remain present. This is the kind of strength that doesn't glitter. It grows quietly, like moss in the cracks, like gold veins in pottery that was once shattered, where every fracture becomes part of the design. You didn't rush your healing, even when you wanted to. You stayed. You let the grief run its course. You let the sorrow speak. You let the numbness pass through. You walked your own road of recovery, not trying to prove anything, just trying to breathe, just trying to understand, and maybe, eventually, trying to forgive yourself, the past, the people who couldn't hold you, the parts of you that didn't know better at the time. Somewhere along the way, without fanfare, you started to change. Not all at once, not like a breakthrough, but slowly, subtly, like a sunrise you didn't notice until the whole room was lit. You stopped needing to explain your pain. You stopped defending your journey. You began trusting it instead. There is strength in trusting that your healing will hold, even when it's quiet, even when no one sees how hard it is, even when the days feel ordinary and your effort feels invisible. You're not performing anymore. You're simply becoming. And that matters more than anything else ever could. You learned how to live in a world that moves fast while you needed slow. You learned how to be okay with not being okay. You learned that numbness doesn't mean failure. It means protection. You learned that silence is not absence. It's space for understanding. And through all that learning, you kept going. You kept tending to your story. You kept holding your pieces. Now you've grown in places no one will ever see. In the deep inner folds of who you are. In the way you hold a friend's sorrow without rushing to fix it. In the way you let joy in, even when it feels fleeting. In the way you no longer need everything to be perfect before you let it be beautiful. This kind of strength isn't posted about. It doesn't come with applause. But it's the kind that changes your life. It's the kind that rebuilds you from the inside out. You became the kind of person who knows how to listen to pain without becoming it. The kind who remembers the worst days and meets them with grace, not fear. Some days, your healing felt like nothing, like emptiness, like still water. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. It was the restructuring of who you are, the careful tending to what was once ignored, the breathing room your soul needed to become whole. You've stopped chasing the illusion that healing means forgetting. You understand now that it means integrating, that your past is not your punishment. It is your teacher, your mirror, your ground. And in its reflection, you've seen who you truly are. Someone resilient, yes, but also tender. Someone wise, but willing to learn. Someone scarred, but still wide open. Pain did not make you bitter. It made you brave. Not the kind of brave that rushes into battle, but the kind that stays when staying is hard. The kind that forgives when it's easier to shut down. The kind that loves again, even after being broken open. That's a different kind of strength. The kind not measured in victories, but in presence. In how many times you sat with your sorrow instead of running from it. In how often you chose stillness instead of escape. In how deeply you've come to know yourself, not as someone defined by pain, but as someone refined by it. You are the gold veining through what once cracked wide open. Not a cover-up, not a mask, but a deeper beauty, born of experience, born of everything you thought would end you, and didn't. You carry your story like a lantern now, not a weight, not a curse, a light that says, I've been through it, and I'm still here, and I am more because of it. You don't owe the world a perfectly tied-up story. You don't owe anyone a timeline. You only owe yourself the truth, and you've honored it, quietly, persistently, through every low moment you didn't post about, through every night you chose to feel instead of avoid, through every time you said, I'm trying, even if it felt like failing. Let this be your reminder. The quiet victories matter the most, the ones no one sees, the ones you carry alone, the ones that happen not in public, but in private, the way you speak to yourself in the mirror, the way you get out of bed when it would be easier to give in, the way you love yourself despite the days when love feels like a stretch. You've become someone rooted, someone who knows pain intimately, but is no longer ruled by it. Someone who no longer confuses pain with identity. Someone who can say, yes, that happened. Yes, it hurt. And yes, I'm still becoming. You are not the broken version of you. You are the mending. You are not the chapter where it all went dark. You are the hand that kept turning the page. And in doing so, you have rewritten the narrative. Not to erase the pain, but to give it context. To place it in the larger arc of who you are, a full, complex, strong, deeply human being who chose to live. This is your strength, born not in defiance, but in grace, not in resistance, but in presence, the kind that doesn't need to be proven anymore, the kind that simply is. So carry your story. Let the gold show. Let the cracks remain. Let every wound that shaped you become part of the beauty you now wear without shame. You are not just healed, you are whole. And that is the quiet triumph that no one can take from you. You've made it here. You're still becoming. And that is everything.